السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بارك الله فيك. الله يجزيك. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على محمد النبي الأمين وعلى آله وصحبه ومن تبعه بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. اللهم واجعلنا منهم آمين. Inshallah, in this evening class, we want to talk about the future of the Islamic work in America, and we will also talk about the latest on Gaza. Why discussing this issue now of the future of the Islamic work in America is because we have seen tremendous changes in this country since Trump came and became president for the second term. This is an administration that does not have a single Jew as in a position of secretary, neither Secretary of the Interior or the Health or the Department of War or Department of State or what have you. Just go back in your memory, you always, we keep talking about, the White House is full of those, Jews who support the Zionists and this and that. This is the first administration that does not have a single Jew. It's the first administration in recent memory also that does not have a single black person. And it's also a recent, if you go back, you will find in each administration there was somebody who have Hispanic roots. Not this administration. So there's not any Jewish, black or Hispanic person in a level of secretary. I mean, there are people, advisor, like Steve Miller, who's really, really a jerk, son of immigrants, who is the author of this separation of parents from children, if you remember those in the first term of putting them in open prisons and the kids and separating the kids and the kids. They could not even reconnect the kids with their parents. He's the architect. Yeah, he's Jewish, Zionist, no doubt, but he's just an advisor in this regard. There are more than 100 million African Americans and Hispanics in this country. More than a third, and not a single representative. We're not talking, of course, about Muslims now in this regard. We have seen a government that's trying to control the universities, just like back home, just like King Abdullah of Jordan and Sisi of Egypt, and full control over the university. They want to be sure who is being hired, and they want to be sure that the so-called right wing in this country, or people on the right, have full influence at the universities. In fact, they are asking universities to sign agreements to open the door for the people on the right. I mean, it got to the point where they have asked universities, some of them, to give them, the government, a list of the Jewish staff. And the Jews, put the alarms. They said this happened only, at that time in Italy and Germany. So if we are discussing and talking about how the government is dealing with people who are indigenous to this country, and they have no share or much of an influence in the government these days, we should not be surprised if the issue of Muslims in this country and the Islamic da'wah in this country become an issue. And it is. We have seen the governor of Texas trying to stop the EPIC project, and the courts refuse it and sided with the Muslims. We have seen the governor of Texas sign this order saying that CARE, imagine, CARE is a terrorist organization. And the Muslim Brotherhood are terrorist organization. They cannot own property in Texas. And last week, the governor of Florida, DeSantis, big failure, who tried to run for the president, he also signed this proclamation that CARE is a terrorist organization and the Brotherhood is a terrorist organization. And it's not just that they cannot own a property in Florida. Any person who give money to CARE or supposedly to the Brotherhood, I'm not sure what's in their mind, this person will not get any project, any funding from state of Florida. At the same time, we have seen President Trump declaring part of the Brotherhood, the Muslim Brotherhood outside of the US, to be a terrorist organization. In Jordan and Lebanon and Egypt. And for those who knows the first term, this is not really new. Because during the first term of the Trump, people who around him were really professionals, top guns from McAllister to, people who were new cons or what have you, but they were professional, career diplomats, people who were like Erickson and the Secretary of State that he kicked him out, Flynn, he kicked him out, or had to resign after a scandal. But those people, at least when Trump wanted to go far, they stood together and threatening him that they will declare him unfit and the whole cabinet will resign, and he had to change. But what we have now here are the Heritage Foundation elements who are running the country. The same Heritage Foundation that we discussed before, those who have the Project 2025, who really want to use power to change the political establishment. يعني تغيير الوسط السياسي في أمريكا. And we have seen major changes that took place in this regard. We have seen how the Department of Defense became the Department of War. Hegseth became the Secretary of War. We have seen bombing and killing people in the ocean, saying, oh, they just deal drugs. But at the same time, the government just released the former president of Honduras, who was accused of bringing to this country, overseeing 400 tons of drugs. He was sentenced to 45 years, the government. Trump gave him a pardon. Because Trump does, sign all those executive orders. He does not read them. There is a clique that's running this country and giving him those orders, and someone is becoming rich. Another guy who cheated people $1.5 billion in a scheme also was set free. So those things combined, and I can talk more about what's happening, will tell us where are we? Where do we fit into this equation? Because in the first term, Trump tried to outlaw the Muslim Brotherhood and say that they are a terrorist organization. So his advisor came to him and said, look, if you would or say that this is a terrorist organization, we cannot meet with Al-Uthmani, who is the Prime Minister of Maghreb at the time, during the time Trump administration. And Al-Uthmani is, an Ikhwan Muslimin of Morocco. They told him we cannot meet with member of parliament in Tunisia because they are a member of the Brotherhood. We cannot meet with members of the parliament in Jordan, they are Muslim Brotherhood. And we cannot, meet with people in the parliament of Kuwait, they are Muslim Brotherhood. So he refrained. Now, who was pushing this agenda? Of course, the Zionists. And the face of it is Ted Cruz. Ted Cruz has a document that someone who is really, naive, somebody who's a member of Al-Ikhwan al-Muslimin who was in America, very naive. He have no clue about politics. And unfortunately, this has been a tradition of the Al-Ikhwan al-Muslimin in the whole world. Just look at what happened in Egypt and how they lost after they got the president and the parliament in their hands. They have no clue. So this guy in the mid-90s wrote a paper how the Brotherhood can control the American government. It's about 20 pages or so. It's on the internet. And this guy did not know what he's talking about, of course. But Ted Cruz came to, in the first Trump administration, they want to control the U.S. government. And of course, people who knows the Ikhwan and they know the U.S. government, how it functions, they were laughing at it. But for those Zionists and their supporters, that was not a laughing matter. Now Trump came back with Ted Cruz pushing it and said, the Ikhwan are terrorist organization, but in those countries, just to satisfy the Zionists. And Ted Cruz, who is one of those clowns of those Zionists, he does not know what he's talking about. And you have seen his interview with Tucker Carlson saying, the Bible says we need to stand with Israelis. If we are with Israel, then we are with God. And he has no clue. Many of you have seen this video. So where this Islamic work will be heading given the circumstances, I want to just mention brief history that until the early 60s, it was mostly the so-called, at the time, black Muslims who were in America. And the bulk of them, hundreds of thousands, were with Elijah Muhammad, the Nation of Islam. And they were not really Muslims at the time because they have crazy things. They believe that Fard Muhammad is God in the flesh and Elijah is his prophet and all this nonsense. It wasn't until the 70s that the son of Elijah, Warith al-Din Muhammad, may Allah have mercy on his soul, Warith al-Din, brought the Jama'at to the mainstream Islam. And of course, Faraqan dissented and kept calling themselves the nation, but the bulk, hundreds of thousands came. That was the indigenous. There were also so-called Sunni Muslims, like Imam Jamil al-Amin, Malcolm X, the nation. This is nation that Imam Jamil with those Imam, the Darul Islam, the Islamic Party. All of this were Sunni Muslims, but they were not many in numbers. On the immigrant side, by the 60s, the MSA was established. And they start having branches in universities, main universities. When I came to America in 1978, I came to New York and basically I became the president of the MSA at Columbia University. They had a full functioning Muslim Student Association working. I'm talking about now 1981. Because there's a history from the 60s that they had in many branches. At the time, the bulk of the students who came here, they came to study and go back home. They were from Palestine, Egypt, they were from Pakistan, from India, some from Bangladesh, some from Iraq, some from Libya, not many Algerians, not many Moroccans at the time, like what we see today, but there were many of these students, and the Gulf students, who were many at this rally used to have thousands of them, because they used to come to Shaw University, where you easily can get a bachelor without any education. That's why Kuwait withdrew its recognition of show, and then Saudi withdrew its recognition in around 1984 or so, and the number dropped from this to almost none in here. But they did build the first masjid in here, which is the brick building, the first floor. And if you go to many states, you will find that the students have built masajid. And eventually those masajid became part of the, or belonged to the community, like this masjid. This is an example, and there are many examples like it. Because the community really did not have the money, or if they have the money, they did not really put it toward an Islamic cause, because that was not something that's on their minds. They came here either fleeing the atrocities and the crimes of the regimes in the Muslim world, or they came here for a better living, no more, no less. But in the early 80s, there was a decision that was made to change the Muslim Association to a community-based or a Jaliyah-based, or for the Muslims who are residing here. And they call it the Islamic Society of North America, ISNA. So ISNA transformed into, or MSA transformed into ISNA, and the MSA became only dealing with the schools. They were no longer dealing with issues pertaining or have to do with the communities. And at the time they call it that we want توطين العمل. توطين العمل is really to keep or make deep roots for Islam in this country. Or indigenization, from the word indigenous, which many people do not know the meaning of it, but indigenous means, the original people of this country. So we say the African American are indigenous, to this country in this regard. However, there were two agendas. Some of those want really to work what they call Islamize America, but there are others who want to Americanize Islam. And there was that conflict. For example, at one point, a school was established, School of Islamic Social Sciences. I'm sure, none of you have heard about it. But if you go to the internet and just put the School of Islamic Social Sciences, you will see now it's just online. But at one point, there were millions of dollars being given to it to Americanize Islam. In fact, Yvonne Haddad had mentioned in a lecture that this school was established in response to the needs of the American government to deal with issues in Islam, like jihad, the right of women, and so on and so forth. So whatever issues that the American government did not feel that they are okay with in Islam, as if we need their agreement to what Islam is, we only need what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, His Prophet said. And this institution took this responsibility. And in here, I'm not talking theory, because I went to the head. First of all, I went to Yvonne Haddad in Columbia University and asked her about that lecture. She said, yes, that's what the school told us. And who told you? She said, Dr. Taha Jabal Alwani. So I went to Washington, D.C., and I saw Dr. Taha Jabal. I said, I saw Yvonne, and she said in a lecture so and so, and she said, you are the one who was saying this. And all his answer was, and Allah is my witness, we are living in this country and we are not going to isolate ourselves. So basically, indeed, that school was established to Americanize Islam. And I know some people will be upset on this, seeing this video. But this needs to be said. At the same time, another vehicle called the American Muslim Council was established. So those people who are thinking of, making Islam rooted in here, there was this attempt to really alter Islam and what Islam is all about. And I do not to get into anybody's intention, but the Islamic Institute, International Institute of Islamic Thought played a role in this. Because Taha Jabir was really the mufti of this. And they had tons of money for them. Tons of money came from the Saudi, and they used to have investments and offshore investments. I mean, it's a long story. But this is the type of work that was on the intellectual level. On the common level, masajid start to being all over the place. And then people realize they are losing their children. So they start establishing Islamic schools. Later on, they start establishing hifdh schools. Then they saw that this is not enough, because as Muslims in this country, we have issues. Islamic institutions start being established, like CARE, Council of American Islamic Relations, and the lawyers. This is the Muslim lawyers in Texas established their own organization to defend the Muslims, especially after the Holy Land Foundation issue that ended up 4 of the activist Muslims in this country in jail. Then we had people still talking about the Middle East and the change in the Middle East. And that's why this city, Raleigh, played a major role in this. In fact, there was for about 10 years or so an organization called the Muslim Arab Youth Association. And they used to have conferences just like ISNA, which will attend by thousands of students. And they will have people coming from the East. We're talking about Yusuf al-Qardawi, Allah yarhamu. We are talking about Sheikh al-Sawi, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We are talking about, major names from Jordan, Sheikh Ja'far Sheikh Idris from Sudan, Abu Faris from Jordan, and so on and so forth. So there was not really one uniform work. There was intellectual work up there, as I said, with that agenda, and there was the work to really take care of the students here who are going back, and there were, good number of students here. But we start having, as I said, the community is building masajid, building schools, and building Islamic institution, and then September 11 happened, which changed everything. It changed everything. Because basically, at that point, Muslims became a target. And that was a major shift. Because those who were here in the 90s do remember that at the time of the Clinton, Muslims start having iftars, Ramadan iftar in the White House. Muslims start having Ramadan iftar at the Pentagon. Muslims start having iftar at different departments and in the government, from the White House down. Because they realize, this is before September 11, that every ethnicity come to America and they make sujood at the Statue of Liberty. I have seen people in my eyes making sujood at the Statue of Liberty. بسجدوا أمام صنم الحرية. But the Muslims were hesitant to get into and be part of this system. So they start doing those actions in this regard to try to entice the Muslims. September 11 changed all of this, and Muslims became the enemy. And from that point on, according to Mother Jones magazine, an American magazine, 33 cases of terrorism in this country were prosecuted by the FBI and the Department of Justice. 30 of the 33 were made up by the FBI. This is what happened to the Muslims after September 11. And we have one case in Raleigh here, the case of the 8, is what made FBI provided young brothers with weapons and a place to train on those weapons. And they had 2 FBI agents working with them. One African American and one Moroccan. All of this, we have seen it in the courts. I mean, we went to the courts and we saw this clearly. But still, the Muslims continue their work, again, limited to building masajid, building Islamic school, Sunday school, Hifdh school. Some Islamic institutions start arising where basically the bulk of them became charitable organization, helping the people in Sudan, helping the people in Afghanistan, helping the people, the miseries with the US occupation of Afghanistan and Iraq after September 11 in this regard. And some people end up in jail, accused of all sorts of things. But beyond that, a movement also started to get the Muslims engaged into the political system. Before September 11, there was this issue that this was used to assimilate the Muslims, because political participation was a vehicle for cultural assimilation for the Muslims. That's why you would have people fighting over this issue in the 80s and the 90s, because there was fear that this political participation was used as a vehicle by Muslims with support of people like John Esposito and others to really get the Muslims to melt into this society and accept the norms of this society and put Islam on the side, the cultural assimilation. After September 11, this issue dies to a great extent, because basically the American culture is saying, we do not want you. And it took a while before this picture started to recover. As I said, between 2001 and maybe 2010, or you remember John Ashcroft, and you remember all those coming to the media, we caught terrorists in New York, we caught terrorists in Virginia, we caught terrorists in Texas, and caught terrorists in Raleigh, North Carolina. Just go back to Mother Jones. As I said, they investigated 33 cases, and they said 3 are genuine, made by Muslims. The 30 other cases was made by the FBI. And we still, to a great extent, had this issue, how the society, how the culture look at Muslims, until October 7. October 7 really have brought a whole new dynamic. We have seen the issue of Palestine at the forefront. We have seen universities in this country changing the temperature around the world when it comes to Palestine and Gaza and what is happening and the genocide. We have discussed this frequently, so I'm not going to spend time on it. But that was a turning point, there is no doubt, that Muslims, Americans, Jews, Christians are together at universities, in the streets, demonstrating for Palestine and against genocide. And then came the tide with the right going against the Zionists and against Israel that we are still witnessing in this regard. So this is a quick, I know this would need really at least 10 lectures to talk in details, but the issue where to go from here. And my view on this, and alhamdulillah, from the first khutbah that I gave in 1979 in Brooklyn College when I was a pre-engineering student until today, I consider myself to be, the son of the Islamic work. When I say Islamic work, really, just to be clear, I'm not talking about coming to the masjid for prayer. I'm not talking about giving charity, supporting others, giving your zakah, going to Hajj. That's your act as a Muslim. The Islamic work, what it means is any act that is done to advance the cause of Islam and Muslims in America. Any work that is done to advance the cause of Islam and Muslims in America, that's called Islamic work from my perspective. So if you establish a masjid, that's an Islamic work. If you establish a masjid just for salah, that's not what we are talking about. You establish a masjid, then you go to another step of having a school, weekend school, looking after the Muslim youth, have a youth program, looking after the needs of Muslim women, looking after the needs of the Muslims on campuses, looking after the needs of the Muslims in the public schools. All of this is aimed at having deep root of presence of Islam and Muslims in this country. That's what we call Islamic work. Now, from my perspective, I think that we as Muslims, we need to decentralize the Islamic work. Meaning, let each community establish its own masajid, its own schools, its own institutions. If there's a big Muslim community like in Texas, let them be at the forefront of establishing new institutions that could advance the businesses, the economy, the economic part of the well-being of Muslims, the interests of Muslims at different levels, building wealth within the community, building influence, extending bridges to the authority and working with them not as agents, but to advance the cause of Islam and Muslims within the law. Within the law. And this is a first step, because it's not easy for any country to control such a work until or unless they become like a Muslim country where you have the government run by the mukhabarat, by the intelligence, like Jordan and Egypt and the Emirates and Saudi, etc. Decentralize the work in this regard. Secondly, we need to deal with the work in this country, the Islamic work, knowing that there is a country with laws. And we can resort to the court at any time. One of the problems with the Islamic work in the 80s and the 90s, which I witnessed, is there were segments of the Muslim workers who acted and work in this country as if there are no country, if there's no government, if there are no laws. Some people dealing with weapons and some people dealing with money and so on and so forth. Just go to the history of the Al-Faruq Masjid in New York and Sheikh Umar Abdul Rahman, Allah yarhamu. So in the 80s and the 90s, yes, there were absolutely violations. And some people ended up by paying for it, either through going to jail, and we know a good number of them went to jail in this country, and some of them were deported without going into names and cases in this regard. Because they were acting as if this country have no laws. They were not aware that every dollar that's being moved is being accounted for, and when the time came, people were held accountable in this regard. A third aspect is that the Muslims need to wake up to the reality that we need to strengthen our communities. We need to put the last dollar on the future of our youth, because they are the ones who are going to carry this Islam and carry the Islamic work. Case in point, masajid. If you come to Salat al-Isha and Fajr, ask how many people are born in this country. What, are you going to get 10%? Barely. In some masajid, in fact, you will have, 10%, 15%, but in other masajid, you might not have even anyone. They are all immigrants from India and Pakistan and Egypt and Syria and this. Now, when this generation, after 15 years, is no longer there, who's going to make i'mar of masajid? So what will be the next stage of the Islamic work. Yes, you come to this masjid on Jum'ah, there's a very good number who come to Jum'ah who are born and raised in this country. But are the masajid, huge masajid being built for Jum'ah Salah and Eid Salah? Are we thinking of where is the work heading when the immigrant generation, now with the government threatening to put limits and does not allow Muslims from, or people from third world country to come here. So is it us only? Of course, many people say, oh, inshallah, this will be a passing period. But we should not think this way. We should not think this way. We need to realize that the challenges will be always there. Muslims here are not the enemy of the state. But at the same time, Muslims here are not here to sell their deen to please the Uncle Sam. Just like everybody is practicing his deen, we want to practice our deen and maintain our principles for ourselves and the next generation. The next point is that we need to be aware of how dangerous the internet is on the next generation. We have, so many people on the internet pretending to be sheikhs and giving fatwas left and right. I cannot blame the youth in this country, people who are raised in this country, of the confusion that they have. And we have to admit that the masajid are not playing a major role into this. Masajid are not really playing the role that they need to play when it comes to the next generation. Relationship between the masajid and the universities need to be very, very strong. With the high schools, with the MSAs, we need to provide funding, we need to provide advice, we need to provide counselors in this regard. We cannot leave them for the internet, so-called internet shuyukh, to lead them left and right. I mean, some of them could say, go and kill. And some of them will say, whatever you want to do, it's okay. You are in America. Just maintain your iman in your heart. And you have all those mixed signals. A next point is to succeed, we as immigrants, we have to work closely with the indigenous African Americans. We cannot just keep having our masajid and our indigenous brothers and sisters have their own masajid. They have their own work, we have our own work. And we interact only on occasion, if there's a wedding or if there's a funeral, or if they have a major speaker coming, come to invite them to this masjid. That's not good enough. Those are an integral part of the Islamic work. And we need to extend the bridges, not to try to use them. I remember at one point, Warthuddin Muhammad, may Allah have mercy on him, stood in a public place and started talking about a new madhab, that they want to develop a new madhab. And the immigrants were said, Imam, who can develop the new madhab? I mean, where are the scholars in America that develop the new madhab? And he mentioned something that's very significant. He said, you guys are the one who are telling us have a new madhab. Of course, he's not talking about me and you and him. He's talking about people who have an agenda to Americanize Islam. Let's have an new American madhab. I mean, he exposed them indirectly, because the immigrants, when they objected to him in public, saying, who are you? You do not have the knowledge. You do not have the knowledge even to be a scholar. So to come with a new madhab, do we have Abu Hanifa and Malik and Shafi'i and somebody on that level? So it came from him. You guys, meaning the immigrants, are the ones. So that level of work, we should, not even come to start thinking that, okay, we will be in charge and we will direct this. No, it does not work this way. Because if we keep thinking this way and do not give the leadership to the people who are the next generation, regardless if they are from the immigrants or the children of immigrants or the children of the indigenous, that need to be a plan to work together in this regard. Otherwise, we will be 1 or 2 generations Muslims in this country. We need also to encourage and keep discussing the importance of finance to the Islamic institution. In this country, it's not like back home. In some Muslim countries, you talk to Afghanistan, if you have $100,000, you can do a lot with it. If you have $100,000 here, what is it that you can do with it? You cannot even buy a house in East Raleigh, or even a townhouse in this regard. So to have institutions in here, we have to look after the finance aspect, endowment, approach the Muslims who have the wealth, and have a plan in this regard. Otherwise, we will come to a certain point that we will find the generosity of the people have a limit. Especially when you have, like in our place, in this area, within about 10 miles, we have 14 masjids. 14 masjids. And almost on a weekly basis, or every 2 weeks, we have a charitable organization coming from here asking for money for this cause or this cause or this cause or this cause. We cannot function like this. We cannot function like this because a genuine work that is rooted, it needs lots of money. I mean, can you imagine the APAC is putting $100 million a year whenever there's election? $100 million. Look, I mean, a substantial amount. Of course, somebody can say, oh, the U.S. is giving Israel $3 billion. Some of it is channeled back. I'm not going to object to this anyway. But I'm saying that this is the type of work that you would need to establish institutions, have people working full time. We cannot keep relying on volunteers. Alhamdulillah, this, for example, institution have relied on volunteers for 20 years. Almost for 20 years. We had only the sheikh, the imam, and administrative assistants, and the people who clean the bathrooms. And then realized that we cannot sustain, when the community became, big, that you can just depend on volunteers in this regard. Another aspect of the work which is little sensitive is we need to keep strong ties with the Muslim world. Those who say that we have to cut ties with the Muslim world, really either they do not understand or they have an agenda of their own. Because that is still where the roots of this deen are. That's where the bulk of the literature and the talk that we have on many of the issues that pertain to the modern Muslims, challenges here and there, especially with the internet coming, that the bulk of it is coming from there. There's no doubt that we will need our own scholars in here, and alhamdulillah, there are many who are really going to study and coming back, but the problem, some of them are coming with packages. and they would need time to adjust to the situation here. So there's no alternative on having, indigenous people here, young brothers and sisters who studied the deen and became the counselors, became the people who will teach, became the people who will lead, became the people who direct, became the people who extend the bridges to the society, because they are much more able than us immigrants. And for the sake of time, I would just conclude here for that part, to spend 10 minutes on the latest on Gaza, because I have been asked of updates and what's happening. Since so-called Trump's plan, which is not really Trump's plan, it's Witkoff and Kushner, with some input from Muslim countries and then alternation that happened, changes with Netanyahu, that we said at the time that the first stage of getting the hostages back is clear, and getting some of the Muslim prisoners, the Palestinian prisoners, out of prisons, that part is clear. And supposedly getting aid into Gaza and this and that was, can be implemented. But beyond this, we said that it's difficult to implement, because there were no specifics. Just trust the president, he will do it. And Witkoff and Kushner, when they go and talk to Egypt or talk to Jordan or talk to Saudi or talk to Hamas, and they are talking to Hamas, breaking the American law. The American law says don't talk to terrorist organization, and the US says Hamas terrorist organization, but they are talking to Hamas. Trump is saying, I don't care. He's not even paying attention to the courts. So when they talk, they are threatening them with Trump's stick. It's as if Trump carrying this stick and following Netanyahu. Do this, do this, do this. I mean, everybody knows Netanyahu wants to continue the war. And we have seen today those Zionists on TV after what happened in Australia, saying the president have to give a free hand to Netanyahu to finish Hamas and to disarm and to get to Gaza, and we have to de-radicalize Gaza, and we have to do this and we have to do this. This is the agenda of the Zionists in America. Because basically they are noticing that the US is giving certain statements that are alarming. For example, US officials last week and before said this force that will be brought to Gaza, their job is not to fight Hamas or face Hamas. And the Zionists raised the red flag. Who then will disarm Hamas, according to them? And we hear the administration saying that we have formed this group that so many countries want to be part of it, according to the president. He said so many countries. He said we have 50 of them, countries and organizations. And that's nonsense. In fact, they are not really able to get support so far, except from Indonesia and one of the former Soviet republics to put troops on the ground. The Europeans and others, even the Arab countries, are saying we train Palestinians, but we are not going to send force. Turkey said we are ready to send force. Netanyahu said, Turkey, no way. We will not allow Turkey. But Trump would force them to take Turkey. Trump will force them. But what you will notice that all this so-called the second stage, they told us that the second stage should be really this month or the month before. They came last week and said it will be next year because it's not working. The plan is not working. Netanyahu is not allowing enough supplies and food and etc. to go into Gaza. You know, the Gazans are saying we have tons of biscuits. We need flour. So he's allowing lots of biscuits and they need flour. You know, the Arabs are bread oriented. Getting biscuits, that does not feed. And we have seen from the rain that was half a meter, in some places was a meter high, that kids need to be carried, otherwise they will drown. And they would not allow. We have seen Egypt sending heavy machinery to look for the Israeli dead bodies. Heavy machinery came into Gaza from Egypt, run by Egyptians to do what? To look for graves of Israeli who were buried in Gaza. The moment that the job is finished, the heavy machinery have left Gaza. Part of the deal was supposed to machinery to come and clean. Now Trump is telling the Israelis, you need to pay for the cleaning. There are 68 million tons of rubbles. And of course, Netanyahu cannot say no. He said, yeah, we'll pay for it. He's talking about the Rafah area in the south, not the whole area. Not to pay for building. And Qatar and Turkey have raised this issue that those who did the destruction, they have to pay for it. And with Trump, as I said, Netanyahu said, yeah, we'll pay for cleaning this rubble. Why? Because Trump is carrying this stick, and the Israelis, the Zionists know it's suicidal to talk back at Trump and challenge him. So basically, Netanyahu is hiding behind Witkoff and Kushner, the two Jewish advisors to the president. And he tried to convince them to convince the president. So for now, stage 2 is on hold. Because the main issues of getting aid into Gaza, the rebuilding in Gaza, clearing of this in Gaza, getting houses temporary for the Gazans, getting medicine, getting those people who would need medical help outside, all of this is not really done. And this is supposed to be already taken care of. And we have seen also, issues that should have been sorted by now, like opening the Rafah entrance. It's still closed. And the Americans are pressing, and Netanyahu said, we will open it with one way for people of Gaza to leave. So basically, Gaza cannot come back. Although it was mentioned in the plan of Trump that people can go and can come back. Why? Of course, because again, Netanyahu wants to resume the war. Netanyahu wants to occupy Gaza. Netanyahu wants to put settlements in Gaza. Netanyahu wants to annex the West Bank. And this conflict is still going. Now, the dangerous part can come if Trump come and say, I have other priorities. Don't bother me with this issue. And last week when we discussed the new national strategy for America, the new national security that came in November, we discussed it last week. One of the main points in foreign policy, it says that the U.S. have spent lots of time on the Middle East on day-to-day basis and on long-term basis. And this is no longer the case. We will not do it. What does that mean? Who else gonna fill the vacuum? Are you gonna leave this to the criminal Netanyahu and Ibn Gfir and Smotrich to determine this? Especially that the Turks has mentioned something very important this week. They said the problem is the weakness of the countries that surround Israel. And absolutely they are on the mark. Egypt is totally out of the equation. Syria do not have an army. Jordan is begging Israel to give them water. Lebanon is not really a state per se. And this weakness that is in those countries that surround this entity is really the main cause that the Zionists have their way in doing what is it that they want to do. Because until now, it's only the people of Gaza who stood with support from Yemen and at one point support from Lebanon, from the Hezbollah. But the Iranians told Hezbollah to stop. They want to just show Trump that they can do it, and on the contrary, they end up being hit. But it was orders from Iran to Hezbollah to halt their support. They want to show Trump that they can deliver. The Yemenis did not listen in this regard. So that's where things stand. And we will need to wait until next year, as I said, to see if the president still will be engaged and force Netanyahu to have, because if Turkey enters Gaza, it's going to change the balance of power in the area, no doubt about it. And that's why the Israelis are resisting it, and they call it red line, red line, red line. They are saying, no, the Turks will need to be part of it. Who will, have his way, remain to be seen. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bring the khair and the good for the ummah and give hidayah to the rest, inshallah. I welcome eventually any feedback on the future of the Islamic work in America, because those are thoughts that came without really discussing them with others. So they are my own in this regard, and they do not reflect, a full plan in this regard, because basically it's a one-person opinion based on one person's experience and vision in this regard. So for any shortcomings, I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive me and give us the hidayah, inshallah. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك. We'll conclude, inshallah.